Hello, my name is Emily DeAngelis, and I selected the Dystopian Fiction unit from Loudoun County's Public Schools English 8 curriculum for my curriculum analysis project. The reason why I chose this unit in particular is because although this is my first time teaching dystopian fiction, I know that I'll be teaching it again. I also have a special connection with this unit because over winter break, I was contacted to work with a group of teachers to adapt these materials from the original curriculum, the units of study that they'd use face to face, and to create materials that might be usable in the distance learning environment. However, as with everything that happens this year, we didn't get to use them in the totally distance learning environment, and I had to adapt them yet again to fit into the hybrid learning environment. So I've worked a lot on these different materials and I've implemented them, and now I want to take a closer look at what worked, what didn't work, and what should I do next year. The provided curriculum in Loudoun County Public Schools is Lucy Calkins' Units of Study. Students are engaged in the Units of Study, or the UOS, from elementary through high school. While Calkins' program is the third most widely used in the country, it's not without its criticisms. Emily Hanford took a close eye to the provided curriculum for the elementary schools, and she shared concerns that the curriculum does not provide enough time or explicit instruction for students to develop sound reading skills. At the secondary level, it's possible that a lack of teacher training or an over reliance on the cueing method could lead to diminished effectiveness in Calkins' framework. Regardless of how effective or widely used the units of study were in their original form, they couldn't be used in today's environment in the distance learning classroom. So, teachers were recruited and asked to volunteer to make materials based on the existing framework that could be used in the distance learning classroom. New to the district, and honestly feeling a little isolated as I taught from my guest bedroom, I volunteered to work with a team of teachers that had taught this unit before and to take their materials and adapt them into something a little bit more technologically savvy that we could use with distance learning. Many of those materials stayed the same as we transitioned into hybrid because we didn't have many kids in the classroom initially. One thing you'll notice about the curriculum that's provided on the screen is that everything is planned for you down to the day. The links where it says lesson one, lesson two, take you to a pre-planned slideshow, and all the resources on the other side are provided and adapted from the units of study. The essential questions that we focused on remain the same as they would in the face-to-face classroom. We focused first on the common characteristics of dystopian novels and asked students to know how knowing those common characteristics would help them as readers. We asked them to look closely at how characters respond to power, systemic problems, and how typical archetypes hold true. We also focused on symbolism and connections that can be made between dystopian fiction and the world today. Reflecting on the unit as a whole, the questions that we asked were actually very effective because each portion of the question turned into a lesson on systemic problems, on obstacles, on symbols, character archetypes, and so on and so forth. The standards, on the other hand, may not have been as effective. On this slide, you'll see the 5 different standards that we set out to accomplish, and you'll see that we only accomplished 3 of them. In red are the standards that we had to toss away because they were too disjointed to be successful in this distance learning environment. In a regular English classroom, you can accomplish many different things: reading, writing, grammar, and vocab. But in the distance learning environment, you have to be a lot more laser focused if you want to get the most out of each lesson. On this slide, you'll see the standards that we did accomplish. 3 of them are carried over from the projected standards, and 8.2 was added in when we looked at the remainder of the year. The dystopian fiction unit comes at the end of quarter 3 and butts into the beginning of quarter 4. In 8th grade, students have SOL tests and they have a lot more on their plates, so we had to add in 8.2 because we had not touched upon this standard at all, whereas other standards we had kind of covered in the past. 8.2 turned out to be an excellent standard to add when we have kids at home and in person because they can express what they know in a variety of ways. It gave us a lot of flexibility, and I feel like it was one of the decisions that we made that I would keep in the future just because of the high quality of presentations that students are turning out. The unit that we designed was aligned with national curriculum standards. However, to really be successful in understanding by design, you have to have a clear focus of the standards at the beginning of the process so that your end result will reflect what you put into the product. The initial standards we started out with were too disconnected to be successful in this hybrid and distance learning environment. In English, you have to balance reading, writing, vocab, and grammar. And in the future, if this unit is going to have the same summative assessment of a presentation, the standards we should look at really are just reading and presenting. The materials provided to us from the county for this unit did not explicitly state any goals. However, they did list outcomes of formative and summative assessment options. These formative and summatives were very repetitive. They were the same thing we did in quarter one, quarter two, and now again in quarter 3-4, but with the spin that it be dystopian fiction. So it was nice that we could get standard 8.2 in there and encourage some creativity. However, when you look at setting goals each unit, I feel like each teacher sets their own personal goals that they want to accomplish when they teach. For me, I really wanted students to have a positive association when they met this new genre. A lot of them thought of dystopian fiction as like, oh, corny and dark. And I think a lot of them ended up enjoying some of the short stories we did together. It was also great to promote creativity, grow their confidence and presentation skills, and create connections that they see between this genre and the world they're living in today. We can look at experiences in terms of educative or miseducative, but this year especially, I think it's important to look at missed educative experiences. We have a lot of missed opportunities this year, and one thing we personally missed in this unit is book clubs. Students love book clubs. They learn a lot from them. They make connections that they wouldn't originally make because of their interactions in book clubs. And one thing we did not attempt to implement from the provided unit was book clubs and distance learning. The big obstacle that was in our way with creating book clubs in this environment was getting books in the hands of children. Even in the hybrid environment, there were a lot of rules and stipulations to getting a book out of the library and giving it to a child. That's one thing that we struggled with, and I'm not sure I have an answer for how we could have done it better. A minimally educative experience that we provided to students in this unit was using three mentor texts. In my class, we used Harrison Bergeron, The Lottery, and Examination Day as stories that helped us get a guide for what dystopian novels usually do. This was helpful for students who struggle to see patterns or make their own connections as they analyze a piece deeply. However, it lacked genuine experience for students because in the hybrid model, most of this was teacher led. I did most of the digging. A potential revision for this in the future would be to have the first mentor text teacher led, the second in small groups, and the third for students to do individually where they could choose their own story. An effective educative experience that this unit provided for students was using WeVideo to create book trailers. Our librarian came in and taught the class, and what she shared was really high-level tips and skills that students will be able to apply to other projects, even things that they're interested in the future. I have a kid who makes podcasts, one with his own YouTube channel, and all those students now have another tool at their disposal that they can use. The unit provided came with a suggested story, Ponies by Kiji Johnson. This story had imagery of cutting to fit in, and looking at students' mental health, which has already been pushed to the bounds amid the pandemic, it didn't seem appropriate to include. Other teachers in the school chose to teach it, and they said that they had great results. Their kids responded to it, and they enjoyed it. However, leaving it out was a decision that I made and would stand by. Some other things I took a closer look at was the use of formative assessments. And I asked myself, what would Dewey do? If Dewey viewed learning as a linear, scalable, and controllable process, according to William Fisher, Dewey would be in favor of formatives. However, we know Dewey is in favor of experience. He views the teacher as a guide on the side and wants students to be digging into their own learning experiences. So, I think formatives are a little bit questionable in Dewey's opinion. Another modification that I'm glad we made is we did away with the repetitive summative assessments. Students had already written papers countless times in the quarters prior. Rather than writing another paper, engaging students in the experience of creating their own video allowed them to personalize their learning, and they also learn skills that they could apply to future projects or things that they're passionate about. And last but not least, some final thoughts on this good old anchor chart. The entire unit basically hinged on this anchor chart of what dystopian novels usually do. And each lesson had this cueing that I mentioned at the beginning, where you say dystopian novels are usually set in the future where things have gone awry. And then students see that happen or unfold in their novels or in the short stories. Dewey and Taba would probably take this anchor chart, ball it up, and throw it in the trash and let students experience the learning, let them ask questions, and let them discover what dystopian novels usually do on their own.